We are in a year-long series called One Single Story, where we're reading through the Bible together as a church chronologically. And there are some really kind of cool things about reading together chronologically. One, the chronological order puts stories together so you see things maybe that you hadn't seen previously. You get details because the stories are next to each other, maybe the same day or whatever, and you get to read the stories together. And we're moving into some of the wisdom material. So you're reading about Solomon. Today I'm going to talk about Solomon. Many of the Proverbs are attributed to Solomon. And for Proverbs, there were 8 podcast episodes. We invited a special guest in each time to talk about one of the Proverbs. And so I would encourage you, if you're looking for a change of pace. A couple of days ago, we had Song of Solomon first, and Sonia and Barbara joined Jay and myself for a podcast about the Song of Solomon. And we've had, today makes the third Proverbs guest. Actually, I arm twisted my wife into doing a podcast just by herself. And so today she's on today's episode as we talk about a Proverbs. And so I would encourage you to be a part of that. If you're like, man, I just got slack and I stopped reading or fell behind and it caused me to start back today. That's what I would tell you. Just pick up where we are today and start reading. If you're new here and you're like, I didn't start with you in the beginning of the year, just start today. That's what I would tell you. And I think it would be great for all of us. It would be wise. That's a good word to use right now, wouldn't it? So today we're going to look at Solomon. Solomon is known for 3 things: wisdom, wealth, and wives. And I didn't even have to alliterate that stretch, to do that. He had, I'd always get this backwards. I think he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, or 300 wives and 700 concubines. Either way, it was 999 too many. And whichever way you look at it, and so that's kind of what he's known for. He's known for being the wealthiest man that ever lived. If you do some math about the people who've ever lived in history, he is the only trillionaire historically, based on the wealth that he had in today's dollars. And so he would be the wealthiest man that ever lived. And many people would attribute him to being the wisest man that ever lived. And it is because he asked for wisdom to judge the people righteously. That's what he asked for. When God said, I'll give you anything, almost this genie in the bottle request, he says, I want the wisdom to judge the people righteously. And today we're going to look at the story. The first thing the Bible records after God grants him this wisdom, we're going to look at that story. So I grew up in a tribe of churches that had district overseers or regional overseers, and then, or bishops as we would have called them. And then we would have had state bishops, which my father served for a number of years as, and they would have been over all of the churches in a particular state. And then there are people who are over countries, and then there's one that's over the worldwide denomination. Well, there was this one particular state bishop that he was here in North Carolina. He would have been my bishop for several years. But he was a hoot. You never could tell what this man might do. As a matter of fact, the funny storybook that I wrote, what I want to do is, he's about 90 now. He lives in Florida, and I have been trying to work out a time that I could go down and visit him and just let him tell me stories. There are a couple in the book that deal with him. But one of the things I remember being told about him, almost legend-like, was what would happen is this: a state bishop, if a church was having turmoil, division, problems, pastoral change, he would go in, and he was the one responsible for making sure that they got a new pastor and helps try to solve the church's issues. So this particular church, this would have been probably 45, 50 years ago, had a pastor who had a daughter and a church clerk who was it was, in my growing up, the most powerful position in the church outside of the pastor. They typically wielded a lot of influence in the church, particularly small churches. They controlled the money. That was what their role was. He had a son, and the clerk's son, the church's clerk's son, and the pastor's daughter were dating, and she got pregnant and had a baby. Now, today I don't think it causes quite the disruption that it would have 40 or 50 years ago. But there's been a time 40 or 50 years ago, not just in a southern church circle, but culturally, even back before that, that would have been frowned upon. Like that, this is, and people would have, tried to hide it. They would have felt embarrassed, and so they didn't talk about it. But you take something that was culturally frowned upon, and you put it in a small southern church, and you really have a recipe for somebody to be, wear a scarlet A. Well, the church was in an uproar about it. People were, one side thought the pastor ought to go because he had, I don't even want to use some of the words that would have been used, because his daughter had gotten pregnant, and shame on him if he can't control his home any more than that. I just want to tell y'all, you probably don't have that much control. And anyway, so they wanted, some of them wanted the pastor to go. Others of them wanted him to stay and forgive. And the church was they were just about to bust wide open. Carl, being the overseer, he went to this church to have a meeting to try to get them to calm down and reconcile their differences. And so he goes in and he lets people speak, and people just get up and they start speaking. And he lets them speak. It goes on for about an hour. And if you grew up in that environment, if you've ever been a part of a church split or seen church fights or seen anything remotely close to that, you know what I'm talking about. If you've never seen it, the Lord has blessed you beyond measure. Okay, that's what I would say. And anyway, so people got up and spoke, and when he let them speak until everybody was done, and he said, I just want to tell you what I'm hearing. He said, everybody talks about this girl, that she's a good girl. She's a beautiful girl. She served in the church. She loves Jesus. She just, made a mistake. And everybody's like, yes, that's how we feel. And he said, and many of you spoke about this man's son, that he's a good guy, that, he's been faithful coming to church since he was a child. And this was just, an unfortunate situation, and you love him and want to see the best for him. And everybody said that. And he said, so the way I understand it is, the only problem we have here is the baby. He said, if we kill the baby, y'all will all be happy, right? Well, in all of those emotions, when he said, if we just kill the baby, because the baby's the only problem that I'm hearing, conviction just began to well over those people. And I've heard him tell it. I've heard other people tell it, that how one person got up and they just started weeping, and they come to pray. And before it was over with, the entire church was praying, and they were repenting and asking forgiveness. And like, when you see it work out that way, you go, man, that was wise. The problem, though, is, if somebody had jumped up and said, yeah, kill a baby, right? The whole room changes. Y'all know what I'm saying? When you take that risk, when you make a choice that you believe is wise, smart, prudent, and it works out fine, that's one thing. But when you take a risk and it doesn't work out the way you thought, it causes other problems. So today we're going to look at this whole splitting the baby conversation. Solomon has asked for wisdom. God has granted it. And so there are three things, and I need to squeeze this as tight as I can so we can make everything happen. The first thing is this. It is the testing of your blessing. You will never receive a blessing that will not be tested. And we do that in our own self. For example, if somebody says to me, I am good at something, what's the next thing I want to do? Show me. Right? I want to see if you're good at it. Like, I've told the story about the girl playing the piano. Like she said, God gave me the gift to play the piano, and she sat down on the piano, ding, 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 ding. That God did, she's lying on God. God did not do that. God just didn't. He didn't stop blaming him. Just say, yeah, I can't play. This is the best I got, and I'm going to give it to the Lord. Don't say the Lord gave me this gift when he didn't. And because I'm going to want to see, like if you can tell me, you can do something, I want to check it out. Well, I think that's the case when God gives us a gift. The world, Satan, everybody around is going to put it to the test. So the story goes like this. It says, so sometime later. So God grants him wisdom sometime later. It could have been the next day. I read a translation that said the next day. I read one that said the next week. It just says sometime later. 2 prostitutes came to the king to have an argument settled. 2 things that are important here in this first verse. First of all, if you're going to use wisdom, you got to know who you're dealing with. Right? Okay, that's the first thing. You got to know who you're dealing with. If it's 2 kings' wives versus 2 prostitutes, your approach might be slightly different. Your understanding of the conversation might be slightly different. Things that might have happened might be slightly different. And so that's the first thing. It's a key to wisdom is knowing who you're dealing with. And then it says they came to have an argument settled. One of the hardest things to do, one of the hardest places to practice wisdom is where there is a dispute between 2 people. And they're the only ones that know the facts. When there's just 2 people and here it's going to be she said, she said. It is you have to listen carefully. You have to pay attention carefully because there may not be any other evidence to be able to tell you. This would have been way before DNA testing. It says, please, my Lord, one of them began. This woman and I live in the same house. I gave birth to a baby while she was with me in the house. 3 days later, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There were only 2 of us in the house. That is a fascinating thing to me to begin with, that one woman had a baby. The other one is 9 months pregnant and delivers it. Y'all read it like that? And then 3 days later, after delivering her own baby, she delivers the baby for the other one because they're the only 2 people in the house. Okay? And it says, but her baby died during the night when she rolled over on it. Then she got up in the night and took my son from beside me while I was asleep. She laid her dead child in my arms and took mine to sleep beside her. The first thing I thought is, how in the world did you sleep through that? Then I remembered having newborns in the house, and I realized that if they were quiet, you just sleep. That's right. And you were probably sleeping pretty hard. And it says she laid her dead child in my arms, took mine to sleep beside her. And in the morning when I tried to nurse my son, he was dead. But when I looked more closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't my son at all. Then the other woman interrupted, it certainly was your son, and the living child is mine. No, the first woman said, the living child is mine, and the dead one is yours. And so they argued back and forth before the king. In this case, somebody is clearly lying and somebody is telling the truth. But there are times when you have a conflict between 2 people that it is much less clear than it's going to turn out right here. And sometimes you're faced with situations where you don't know what to do, and listening to 2 people who are in a dispute can be painful, right? If you've ever had people come sit down in front of you and they're both airing their grievances and you're trying to listen, you're like, oh my goodness. No, I can't say that. I started to say you wanted to take the sword, but you can't say that. But, it's painful to listen to 2 people just going at it, and there seems to be no resolution. what I would tell you is that your gift is always going to be tested. Your blessing is always going to be tested. And if you ask God for wisdom, it's kind of like asking God for patience. Guess what you're going to get? Opportunity to use it. Yes, you are. If you ask God for whatever and he gives it to you, you're going to have an opportunity. It's going to be tested. And that's what happens here in this story. Solomon asks for wisdom. He gets tested in a really, really significant way. Here's the second thing about testing. Testing brings out the truth. I would tell you that one of the best ways to get to the truth is to ask questions. Put people to the test. Like, have you ever done that? Have you ever said, like, when you were younger, that you were in such and such a place? And somebody, and the person you were telling that asked you a question that in order to know, you would have had to been there. And you were suddenly like, I don't know. It's because that testing question is revealing. Asking somebody, where have you been or what have you been doing? And then when they answer and tell you where they were and you know some things about the situation, like, well, we went to a ball game. Well, who won? Well, I won't pay into the scoreboard. I won't pay attention to the scoreboard or whatever. There are testing questions that you can ask if somebody's investigating a crime. One of the kids, I think it was Austin up here, was going for criminology. That one of the testing things they can do is they ask testing questions. You can ask a single question that can reveal the truth, and you don't have to ask anything else. So then the king says, the king said, let's get the facts straight. And I would tell you this, when you're dealing with a situation where there is a dispute, clarifying what has been said is a wise idea. Just saying, this is what I heard. I heard you say A, B, C, D. He said, let's get the facts straight. Now, here's something I want to say about facts and knowledge, okay? Sometimes we confuse facts and knowledge with wisdom. Knowledge is not wisdom, nor are facts wisdom. They are a piece of it or a part of it, but they are not all of it. Here's why I can tell you that. You can take two people, go to the same classes, have the same professors with the same teachers, walk out with the same degree, and one of them does A and it's successful, the other one does something completely different and it is unsuccessful. It has nothing to do, they both received knowledge. They just didn't make application of the knowledge. There is a lot more that goes into wisdom than just knowing something. You can take two people in a general setting and give them both the same set of facts, and they both won't respond the same way. Facts or knowledge do not create wisdom alone. There has to be some application. There has to be some risk taking. There is some timing that is involved when it comes to wisdom. I'm going to make this choice. I'm going to do it at this time. I'm going to apply what I know here. The short way I've heard people say is that wisdom is, knowledge is knowing how to do something. Wisdom is knowing when to do it. There's 1,000 ways you could say this. So he said, let's get the facts straight. Both of you claim the living child is yours, and each says the dead one belongs to the other. All right, bring me a sword. I'm telling y'all, this is a risky proposition. Because he's going on a hunch. He's using wisdom, not knowledge. He doesn't know for sure which one belongs to who. He just believes if I do A, I'm going to get B response. And this is going to work out. He says, bring me a sword. So a sword was brought to the king. Now, here's what I want to ask you. If both women, only one does, if both women say, cut the baby in half, what's Solomon going to do? When it is the Old Testament, they would have cut the baby in half. That's what they would have done. But typically, like, what's he going to do? He's going to be in a spot. So he's taking a risk here, believing that if I do one thing, something else is going to happen. Then he said, cut the living child in two and give half to one woman and half to the other. What he was depending on, what he was counting on, is his understanding of that mother's sacrificial love that would have said, I want my child to live whether he lives with me or not. That's what he's counting on. He's counting on a particular response that if I threaten to kill the living baby, the mother whose baby that really is just going to say, no, I'll give it up because I would rather the baby live than to die. That's what he's counting on. He says, then the woman who was the real mother of the living child and who loved him very much cried out, oh no, my Lord, give her the child. Please do not kill him. But the other woman said, all right, he will neither be yours nor mine. Divide him between us. Like, how cold and callous do you have to be? He said, no, just go ahead and chop the baby up. Then the king said, do not kill the child. Give him to the woman who wants him to live, for she is his mother. Solomon understood that the desire, the need, the want for this child to live was important. This is, in my opinion, radical wisdom. I would tell you there are many situations that we walk in. Today, like this wouldn't even be nobody would bring out a sword. They'd bring out, they'd draw blood and do DNA samples and they could decide with no pain. Solomon's taking a real risk here. And I would tell you, sometimes in your life, to determine the path you need to take, you're going to have to take a risk, a measured risk, an educated risk that allows you to know what the answer is. Last thing. Testing is a chance for others to see your blessing. Many of you in this room are afraid to be tested or tried or pushed or put in the fire. What I would tell you is those are opportunities for other people to see what God is doing in your life. They are opportunities for you to shine forth and show forth the blessings that God has placed in your life. It's a chance for other people to see your blessings. There are things that I call influence accelerators and influence crashers. There are things in your life, single decisions, I know influence is gained over a long period of time, but there are things you can do that are one-time decisions that change the trajectory of how people view you. You make one choice. Like, we could go back in time. We can see some leaders in our country. They made lots of good decisions, but there's one thing they're known for, and it just shot them to the top, and people revere them because they did this one thing. We can also think of people, right, who did something ridiculously stupid. They were at the top of their game. They were everybody held them in high esteem, and they did something ridiculously stupid, and they crashed. And we never heard from them again. Sometimes we don't put enough emphasis on every decision, because sometimes one decision is the very thing that changes how people view us. It changes what people think of us. It can be the right idea, the right action. It might be the right investment that you make. And think about all the people, all right, who invested $1,000 in Amazon, 25 years ago. Think about that. They look like the smartest people in the world right now. Let me tell you what else they are. Rich. You know what? It's just one decision. Just one thing. Sometimes it's just one risk, one direction that you go. This one decision sets the tone for the rest of Solomon's reign. It says this. It says, when all Israel heard the king's decision, the people were in awe of the king, for they saw the wisdom God had given him for rendering justice. This single decision, Solomon was already king. David had already set him up to be wealthy. But this one decision, this one simple thing, changed the trajectory of how people viewed him. It said the entire nation suddenly was in awe. They were in awe of what Solomon could do because the wisdom that God had given to him. The Bible tells us that we can ask for wisdom and God will give it to us. I will tell you, you should not take any decision lightly, because this decision may be the decision that changes the trajectory of your life. You think, listen to me, since you're talking to graduates, you think, graduates, I'm just going out on a date. Lord, it's 10:01. I got to quit. Don't ever approach it as I'm just going out on a date. Lord, help me. Because that one decision may change the trajectory of your life. One choice, one night, 1 hour, one car ride. Come on now. The wrong person at the wrong time making an unwise decision can change the trajectory of your life. Don't just say, well, I need something to do. Don't do it because you need something to do. It can change your life for the worse. It can also change your life for the better, making the right choice. May God bless every graduate in here with the exact right spouse, because the exact right spouse is like gasoline to your fire. Amen? The exact wrong one. No amens. The exact wrong one. Right? The exact wrong one can create all kinds of havoc. Every choice you make has an implication that can raise the bar or lower the bar. Solomon, if you just took this story and set it outside with nothing else, no context, no understanding, you would think, what's the big deal? But in the context of what he was doing, the people of Israel said, he's our king. And we are in awe of him. Communion is one of those wise, I call it a wise design. It was the meal created by Jesus to remember him. Jesus knows how things are going to play out, and he sits around the table with his disciples and he says, I want them to remember what I'm getting ready to do for them. I want them to remember how my body's going to be broken. I want them to remember how my blood is going to be shed. And he lays this meal out for them so that they can remember him.